That's right. Ways and Means, still the committee that we are in. Today's a date, which is April 8th, Wednesday. It is 2:30. We are continuing our work on H 955, picking up where John Gray.
Hello. Hello. I'm John Gray.
Do you remain John Gray?
I remain John Gray from the Office of Legislative Counsel. I also will do something predictable and screen share. Pretty cool.
But we are noting your refusing from the every day.
Yeah. Okay. So we are jumping in at section 65. I did want to pause, call it a few before we go through the text. So the first is that, as the chair noted, I did make two small tweaks. I will talk about them when we get to them. They don't occur until about page 84 or 5. The reason I call this out is that I know that you have plenty of copies in front of you. So at the very end of the bill, there will be a point where the pagination is slightly off, but I will let you know. The other thing I wanted to call out, which is something that occurred to me while discussing effective dates, which is that something we haven't included here that does need to be included, is amendments to the Act 73 transition language, which speaks to FYs 29 through 33. So we just need to sync that up with the timeline proposed here. It's not something in this draft, but it's just something I'm thinking about, is that any of those transitionary measures should be, while the effective dates themselves are addressed in the updates to the effective dates, the underlying text itself references those fiscal years. So we just need to, I'm just going to repeal them and I'll replace them with exactly the same thing, but with new years.
Yeah, and I'll flag for folks, I had a offline conversation with the treasurer's office yesterday at the end of the day. And so there are some tweaks to the language based on their advice about what would work better with the bond ratings agency. That was the sentence I was trying to get out. Thank you.
And when we get to those sections, or I guess I can just go ahead and forecast that when we get to those sections, I may also want to have another offline conversation about how these work after talking to some folks in my office. So let's jump in. Section 65, I know that for both Beth and Kirby, you went pretty quickly through the text that was untouched, but I also know that my sections were the pieces that folks I think most wanted to see multiple times. So I can go slower if that is desired, like actually show you the untouched text. So I'll sort of half do that by scrolling slowly. Section 65 is the intent section that applies to the school construction provisions. And what you're going to recall is this sets out a set of findings about the grand need for updates and how that might underestimate costs as of the current date. Talks about how our current education finance system works and applies pressure to property taxpayers. And this can lead to some disincentives for districts to pursue school construction projects, even when they are educationally or otherwise necessary. And the other piece that it notes, trying to set up the framing for this act, at the very bottom of page 69, is that Act 73 didn't provide additional funding for capital investment. And it specifies that until additional revenue sources are utilized for an alternative financing model identified, new school construction projects will continue to be funded from the ed fund and continue to apply pressure to the property taxpayers. On page 70, you see your set of intents. I'll leave you to look at those, but I'm going to touch on one or two of them. So subdivision 4 is the one I primarily wanted to hit. In the short term, catalyze the state aid for school construction program by providing state aid in the form of up to an additional $50 million. I've highlighted that in green just to call attention to this green because it is not new language. I just want to make sure the highlight is there so you guys think about this number. And then similarly, I have regional high schools or other projects that result in the consolidation of school governance structures highlighted. This was the generic call out I had provided to try to align the goals of this program with the broader goals of the act. I know there was some continued discussion around use of the terms regional comprehensive high schools and other terms. So this could be exactly what you want, but it's highlighted in a number of places in my sections because in case you wanted to use the same call out in each section, and there is something very specific that you want, this may be language that requires it. But for now, I'm just going to leave it like you.
So one of the things that's interesting about Act 73 is it's also pivoting what we've seen as some of the priorities in education. And we went through a period where we were very focused on community school. And I did suggest some language. I just wanted to surface it again because a lot of that is dependent on co-location of services. And when Department of Mental Health is running at 27% vacancy, this is all falling back on school districts. And if there is some opportunity to think about community schools, if they have been articulated and supported by us in previous policy, I would like to encourage us to consider that.
I love community schools policy. I was really excited when we passed it and the pilots that were federally funded. The education committee did not move any community school language forward in this iteration or the Act 73 iteration. And so I guess if we're going to include something like this, we would, in this language, we would want to check with them because we've been basically just carrying forward the school construction language priorities that they passed themselves.
And there are still references in statute to
Yes.
it. So my point is then maybe the question is, I mean, my challenge is we seesaw districts, we say, go here, and they go here, and then we change their minds and say, no, go here. And what is it, when you're talking about buildings, it should be durable. You're not planning for next year, you're planning for 30 years out. And could we have a conversation about whether we think community schools is something we care about for kids? And if it's not, then let's just take it out of the other places in statute too.
So I would ask that you, since this is language that the education committee did as part of their priorities that were essentially just carrying forward through multiple bills, I would ask you to take up that community school question with the education committee because they're the ones who are setting the policy priorities in here.
Yes, couple of things. I appreciate that this green language talks about consolidation, basically, structures, governance structures, as opposed to physical structures. A lot, well, let me keep going so you can.
Yeah, I mean, this is the trying to tie to the pieces you don't see here because these are instances of amendment to the House Ed bill.
Right.
But if you had the underlying text of the House Ed bill in front of you, right, you would know that it is shooting for the creation of new school governance structures. And so this is trying to
Understood.
tie that.
In my district, I have expressed in meetings, I'm very concerned about school governance in a new realm, new environment. We don't know how we're gonna get there. And this language would be helpful. Basically, navigating from here to there. I appreciate that. Just comment.
So for now, I'm gonna leave this untouched, but it sounds like more may come, and just know you're gonna see this highlighted throughout my
And
section.
that $50,000, folks, is, sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
50 million. That was, sort of checked back in with the treasurer's office yesterday about that was the number that they shared with us. And the
86.
Institutions and Corrections Committee is taking testimony about this tomorrow to make sure they understand where that number came from.
Okay.
And if this does move forward, the treasurer's office will likely pull CDAC back together to sort of confirm that number for us.
I was just curious. I mean, that 50 million, that's just a small part of what's coming ahead in the future. Is that correct? With building schools?
I would imagine so. That's not going to get us very far.
No.
No.
So where are we going to get the additional funds?
I have absolutely no idea.
Just curious.
No idea.
I think what I would say is not knowing the answer to that question has held us back from even taking a next step for a while. And so I see this as like 2 steps forward, and we're going to have to do a lot more next year. I don't think we can even begin to look for a revenue source or answer that question until we know what scale we actually need of money. And so that's in here too. But by putting this bonding capacity on the table, it's more than just studying the problem, which I really can't stand the idea of doing.
We have that spreadsheet. Gee, oh, you know,
Do you want someone to get you a? Okay. Do you want us all to watch you while you talk? It's the worst. It's the most worst. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, but we had a spreadsheet showing some of or all of the debt. Did we decide to do anything with that
We're getting there.
already?
So
Wait, yeah.
some of these are nice framing actually for the exact subdivisions that we're in. Just convenient. The reason that there's this call out to in the short term is for exactly the reason that Representative Page identified, which is that it's the transitional step, right? Don't know what the future holds, but maybe it holds on page 71.
Oh.
In the long term, provide state aid in the form of a debt service subsidy to school districts pursuing school construction projects that align with the goals of the state aid for school construction program. And 6 speaks to some of the issue that's being confronted here. So throughout Vermont's education transformation, provide state aid through multiple funding streams. That's the general obligation bonding plus the debt service subsidy until the burden on property taxpayers imposed by school construction expenditures can be reduced, right? So that's the recognition that this problem isn't resolved yet. Lastly, new language here in the intent section, and this was split off from former subdivision 5, leverage the capacities of the Vermont Bond Bank to simplify bond issuances for school districts, increase financing opportunities, and protect the state's credit rating, which is part of that check-in again on the $50 million figure with CDAC.
And Carol, this was to address the concern that you had yesterday.
That you would exclusively route aid for school construction projects to those who use the Vermont Bond Bank and not provide it to those who do not. So this is separated off from 5, before 5 included the bond bank column. Now it's just, if you can, leverage the capacities of the Vermont Bond Bank, but there's nothing about 5 that is linked to it. Section 66, this remains unchanged. This is the creation of those positions within the school construction division. I'm not going to hit that again. Section 67, this is your end of year rules from AOE on school construction. Again, reminding you that there's a transfer of the state board rules July 1, 2026 to this summer. But this is the specific rulemaking that should be undertaken. And there are a few things here. Rules should address prioritization of bonus incentives that same language as yesterday, but the same green highlight, regional high schools or other projects that result in the consolidation of school governance structures. The new language that you do see here, and we are at the bottom of page 72. Yesterday, what you saw in subdivision D was prioritization and bonus incentives that direct greater construction aid to school districts with lesser wealth. And it just referenced aggregate equalized education projects grand list per weighted long-term membership. This was put together fairly quickly, but was pulled from Massachusetts language that Representative Kimball had provided. It's different measures of wealth. These may warrant further thought, but this is pulling in the factors that are used in the Massachusetts program. The first should be familiar. Aggregate equalized education property tax grand list of the aggregate municipal members per weighted long-term membership for the district. The second wealth measure you might look to in determining how much construction aid could go to a school district. The district's per capita income, that's a percent of statewide average per capita income. So it's an income consideration. The last of these is about the student counts themselves. So on page 73, and I might need to change some of the terms, the district's proportion of low-income students as defined by federal eligibility for free or reduced price lunch as a percent of statewide average proportion of low-income students. These are the factors used in Massachusetts. They may not be applicable here, but for consideration, these are different wealth measures you could use, and the last of these may be complicated by the way that the state provides.
Just proportional.
I think the one thing I would change just off the bat on that is to say economic disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's what we use other places. Like, yes, I anticipated you would say that, and I had thought the moment I pulled this up. Anyone else?
I'm just struggling with prioritization, not mentioning something about, like, I understand that the economic need, but also the severity of the situation in certain districts.
Condition of the facility.
Yes, like you could, like I could envision a situation where you have a district that may not be as economically challenged, but the building is in extremely bad shape and is at the point where you're not gonna be able to educate kids in it. And I would think that that would need to be prioritized in some way.
I thought that was prioritized in a different context, a different section.
Maybe I just don't have it on my head.
Yeah.
I think the helpful context for this is that this is not an exclusive list of things that should be undertaken as prioritization measures. These are things you are saying, make sure you do include these in part because you might expect that they otherwise wouldn't be if you didn't spell them out. You can add anything you want here to be a direction for the program, but something I would naturally expect to occur in a prioritization section is that you direct aid to those who most require it, right? It's not to say that you couldn't add something here, but I would just say, I don't think you need to list every thing you want included unless you're especially concerned that intuitive things will not be.
And my thinking was sort of the ratio of the spending is directed towards the fiscal need of the district, and the support for construction or not support for construction is related to the construction need of the district, but that would not be how this is framed. So I have absolutely lost track of the details. Good. Okay, great. Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Note for people listening from outside, I'm sure there's some concerned about the word result in the consolidation of school governance structures. I know where this goes and I understand the intent of the language, but there are certainly people whose back goes up immediately when they hear the word consolidation. And I'm not sure. I'm not recommending a change. I'm just pointing this out for people who are very concerned about whether consolidation means a more functional governance structure. I mean, there's a lot of ways that phrase could go, and I don't propose that we change it now because I don't know what I would say. I'm just.
Well, I guess I want to offer that I understand that people are comfortable with that word. That is one of the prime purposes of this legislation. And I know that some people like that and some people don't like it, but I think pretending that's not one of the prime purposes of this legislation would be dishonest.
I'm not advocating a change in words.
Yeah.
And to offer specifically what this is saying is, again, to Representative Page's point, limited fund pool available. You're trying to catalyze this with the additional 50 million in bonding capacity, and it's recognizing that you need to choose a subset of potential projects to prioritize over others. And this is saying, align the way that you fund school construction with the governance aims of the act. Like that is the thinking.
Representative Burkett?
I have the same concern as Jim, but a slightly different twist on it, which was that it did stick for me, the fact that we were just focused on consolidation in this sentence. In my mind, the incentives for regional high schools, there was a quality piece of it too. It was to make sure that kids had access to certain things that we're expecting to be in the regional high schools. So there are, places, in the state that are almost public school deserts or getting close to, and so may not have access to the public high school. And we know that career technical education is in short supply in a lot of places. And so in my mind, it was not just the consolidation, the governance aimed, it was also the quality piece that was meant to be addressed by the regional high schools. And so it's been sticking with me as we've been reading through it, and I'm trying to articulate it.
So maybe there are some modifiers we can add to regional high schools to make it clear about why we want regional high schools.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
what we didn't have in the finding section of the other thing we were looking at yesterday. And we don't talk about students, we talk about tax.
Bridget, are you able to think about ways to
Yeah,
modify that?
yeah, I
Okay,
can,
great, okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So, my question about the debt that municipalities or school districts have already
We'll get
incurred.
to that in a minute. We haven't gotten to that yet.
The legacy debt,
Yes.
we will come to it. Yep.
I have another
Okay.
question, just thinking of timelines and everything that we're going over. Once this ends, the July 1st, 2031. It could
What is
very,
ending?
it could very well start up again. Is that correct? Is this a guide for future,
So this is for a permanent state aid program. I think when you look at the timeline that staff has provided is just intended to capture this transitional phase that's getting you across the sets of measures contained in the act. But of course, much of this is intended to persist right into the future. They're not just transitioning. So the classifications, the foundation, all those things, that's a vision for the future, and we're just seeing the stages to get to those points. But this state aid program is intended to be a permanent program. You're correct that we do have the intent language speaking to in the short term, providing that $50 million in additional bonding capacity. So at some point, the vision is that you would have something else. But certainly the rulemaking itself would be something permanent that's there and for future purposes beyond 2030.
reinvent?
Yep, exactly. Okay. So that is rulemaking for school construction by AOE end of this year. Also speaks to treatment of outstanding capital indebtedness. And then you see the call out to emergency rulemaking. Section 68, I don't think I have any updates here other than, again, the green highlight for regional high schools and rehabilitation of existing school facilities. Aligned with the creation of new government structures.
I'm a little slow to this. It's okay. I'm still trying to figure out if we are doing block grants or weighted spending base plus weights with the limit on excess spending above the base. And then also weighting. I'm just trying to figure out how the funding formula works together with the heavily weighted construction there, because all kids need buildings. And is the assumption that if you get not much aid from the state, that you're going to pick it up on private fundraising?
No, I don't think so, but let's keep on. I think we're gonna get to maybe an answer to that question to some degree, but maybe that.
The limited answer I can give right now, I guess, is that this program would apply across both funding formulas, right? The current education system and then also the future foundation formula, which I think part of what you're talking about is in the future. How does this work? The piece that we spoke about yesterday was the exclusion from supplemental district spending cap for those. But it is a question of if a school district doesn't have the capacity to vote something that raises additional funds, even using an uncapped supplemental district spend. I think you're asking then, how do they fund it? A school construction project? Is that?
Yeah, if the district's already looking at a 20% potential cut in spending, they're going to be hitting that excess spending, whatever that spending over base, whatever we're calling it in the future formula pretty quickly.
So if we're talking about are you talking in the context of school construction?
Yeah.
In the future state of the foundation formula? Okay, so in that.
Less access to construction aid from the state, and they aren't allowed to raise locally.
In that scenario, what I imagine is being outlined in this bill is that there's a capital stack, and that capital stack includes the direct bonding capacity of the state for a portion. It includes the construction aid that is covered as a grant of sorts as part of the education payment, as part of the stack. And then depending on the carefully calculated wealth of the district, we changed the calculation of it, then they would be making up that amount that was the categorical grant would change. And so there'd be a different size gap depending. The remaining gap would be covered by supplemental district spending. And I think we still need to have a conversation about how it works if supplemental district spending has the sort of varied income and this has the varied income, how those two fit together. Or if we should just say that the grant from the aid from the state should be the same for everyone, and the sort of differentiation based on district wealth is covered entirely on how supplemental district spending is calculated. But so none of it would be, I mean, it's possible that some of it would be private fundraising, but I think that the stack does not need to include private fundraising, though I imagine some districts might or might not do
I'm not
that.
advocating for.
No, I don't think you are.
But I think we are setting up a situation where that is going to be the default.
So I don't think I think the supplemental district spending is what makes up the difference, and I think we've removed the cap on supplemental district spending in the case of just for capital construction costs. And so I think we need to make a decision as a committee if we want supplemental district spending to always only have to cover 5% of school construction costs, or 10% of school construction costs, or if we want it to be variable the way it was in Rhode Island. Representative Bodie.
So a couple of questions about that. Supplemental district spending is something that the voters vote on. Once you're obligated to repay, then what do you do if the voters say no to the supplemental district spending? That's number one. Number two, let's say you need supplemental district spending and you want to do something that's supplemental district spending in addition. You have to ask two separate questions. Like, one question is, you have to vote for this because we have to repay. And the other one is, would you like to vote for this? I mean, what are we gonna do about
Those are all really, I think those are exactly the problems in front of us. What do you want to do about them?
what do I want to do?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can have it be.
We could have it cover
our
us.
supplemental district spending. I think you could count it as supplemental district spending, but it couldn't be. But how can you say, well, go ahead and vote on this? It would have to be, well, required supplemental district spending.
So it could be, sure, we could also say that the state's going to cover the remaining costs that are needed in categorical grants and not have a supplemental district spending component. Everyone we've talked to who's familiar with school construction programs all says you need like the local share in order to have like skin in the game, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that's true or not. I think people like, but it is where all the testimony we've gotten. I generally feel comfortable skin in the game as a phenomenon in funding structures.
Well, I have like the respect that, which is, I know that in a local thing that I'm familiar with, as the building progressed, you know, to keep costs down as low as possible, things just kept being cut out of the project when they could be. If you knew you were getting all, you didn't have to worry about how it was going to impact your tax rate. Right? You might not have cut them.
Well, the amount that's approved would still, in this language as it's drafted, would still very carefully control what is approved for spending. And that would all be managed by a construction team.
You know,
Into this hypothetical scenario.
As things change,
Yeah.
as things change, you might find another way to, here's an example, a real world example. A particular program is meant to be included in high school. Then seeing what the cost of that is, and then another building becomes available near the high school. And well, a rehab of that building might not only be a better location for that other program, but it would also save with the main building. If you are already on track with an agreement to somebody else overlooking it, maybe they won't make the change. So should we give them the ability to make a change if a change becomes, you know, available?
I imagine that would go through, so there's, with that exact problem, what already exists under current law in a non-school construction scenario. And say like VHCB and VHFA have approved funding for a capital stack for a housing trust project. They can do change orders
Like
regular. That's a very normal part of any process like this that I imagine would happen in rulemaking is like definitely not something we need to legislate.
I get it. But then I would say also to allow great flexibility there, because literally that is not an envisioned way to do things. So you'd have to wait to get the approval maybe for that other building to be rehabbed so you could use it. And then you hopefully fall apart and have to do a more expensive thing because you don't have the permission.
So what do you want to do with that?
What do I want to do about it? I guess I would say, once that the building committee, what is it called, is got
So-
okay?
Yeah, so what's contemplated in here is that there's a construction management division that would work with different.
Construction management.
Yeah, and
That
then,
they could make a decision along the way to use.
well, and let me finish. So that when a school district is interested in pursuing a new construction project, that it would have to receive preliminary approval from the secretary or secretary of the Agency of Education. And that approval would be contingent on those eligible costs being reviewed. And so there's all that entire process at the front end. And that's kind of what we're going to be going over, and then the prioritization of those projects. So if you have something happen midstream and you're totally changing what it is, then you're going to have to go back through the same kind of process through the secretary. This is all changed, that kind of stuff.
And do you think that would be a like years long process or a fairly quick process? So you can keep moving ahead?
No idea.
I imagine, I mean, with a housing project where that kind of thing happens, it happens like in 30 days or less often.
Change order.
I'm gonna
acceptance.
say that, all right, then let's,
Out of scope from the original.
I guess that, is that gonna be a rule though, not? So maybe we just say the intent is that if a change order comes up, that it shouldn't be something that is delayed, that it is expedited or something.
That strikes me as sort of in the weeds for statute, but we have a whole thing about adopting all kinds of rules about the construction program.
This is an entire construction planning guide
Okay.
that the agency puts out.
And that we can look at, and if we don't like it.
To your point about supplemental district spending, I feel like we would almost need to have a separate kind of supplemental district spending with, model language or something for the ballot, and that supplemental district spending, the question to the voters would have to be, are we signing up for a bond? Are we being given bonding capacity? And that means we're not just signing up for supplemental district spending this year, we're signing up for 20 or 30 years.
I like that.
And that's different than the supplemental district spending that we would go to
That's
Voters.
awesome.
with operating.
Pass that something.
Similarity then to excess spending threshold is that amount would be excluded from calculating what your supplemental district spending would be
Mhm.
above and beyond the education opportunity payment.
It's a supplemental district spending.
Do we need to whiteboard the name of the
No,
supplemental?
we're not, but, Bridget, I know you're kidding, but can you,
Construction supplemental district spending.
great, thank you, we've whiteboarded that. That seems like
Yeah.
can you work that out? Okay, thank you.
That addresses my concern.
Okay,
Can I respond to
please,
something on this?
indeed, that is why you're sitting in the chair.
So it does make sense to be concerned about this, that, you're doing a yearly vote on something, but essentially you're obligated to follow through. And so what sort of vote is it? So that makes sense, that is a concern. I did just want to note that is how it currently works too.
Yeah.
You currently vote a bond and it is in your ed spending every year and you have to vote to authorize it. The distinction is that the way it's funded in the future is different. It's locally, right? But I just did want to note that each year you are having to vote on your spending that includes the bond coverage, right?
Even in like normal.
Your current law,
That is an interesting.
current law.
Well, it's true, but then there's no cap right now. Like the
Right.
foundation formula provides a hard cap on what you're that you don't decide as voters. So that's the difference really. I think.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding a piece here. There isn't a cap in this draft for the supplemental district spend. Am I misunderstanding?
No, there isn't. But my point is in like current state, yes, you're voting to reauthorize payments for the bonds, but then you also are that can eat into, programming and all those other things. However, your budget is unlimited. If your voters are willing to pass it, you can go to voters and say, we can pass a bigger budget. Future state where we're having a foundation formula that we're not really even voting on.
Right. You can't
There's-
choose to.
There's no flexibility there. And so that's why you would really need that flexibility from voters to have the local spending already pre-approved on construction. If you're committing something long-term, you're going to have to ask voters to commit to it long-term because you won't have funding through the rest of your budget.
Right, the only trade-offs you can make at that point are in things outside of the EOP as opposed to the whole of the ed spend that you have. Okay. On page 68, I think we were just talking about this piece, this is the identification of regional high schools, rehabilitation opportunities. There is a change on page 74. And this is drawn from recommendations from Representative Holcomb that I received through some chain of emails. I'm not sure how. So in developing the board's report, board shall specifically consider how to achieve, this is part of the identification of regional opportunities, right, from that advisory board. In developing that report, the board shall specifically consider how to achieve appropriate scale, given research on school size and travel times, and how to achieve regional comprehensive high schools. The call out to regional comprehensive high schools is also part of why I have highlighted in green the other text throughout this draft. So if there's one alignment, just let me know. Okay, section 69. This is language that you have seen multiple times at this point. I think, or maybe I'm in some alternate universe. This is the intent language for your school construction chapter, and this is setting up that short-term piece that we spoke about for the additional 50 million bonding capacity. It is further the intent of this chapter, the state aid chapter, to prioritize school construction projects that align with the creation of new school government structures under this act, essentially. It is the intent of this chapter to leverage additional state bonding capacity to support the construction of these projects while the state identifies the total construction need to be supported by state aid offered in this chapter. Again, that forecasting that more is to come. We spoke yesterday about section 70, and I am on page 75 for those on paper, and your pagination should still be correct at this point. Nothing to really hit on this page. On page 76, these are the updates to the advisory board membership. Again, nothing to hit. The new addition that you saw yesterday is adding the school construction program director at AOE. Okay, at the bottom of page 77, we are jumping into what I regularly call the core section of the state aid program. This is what sets out the application, preliminary approval, final approval, construction aid, the things that people really have questions on. I think there's only a few limited tweaks here, but if it is helpful, I can just scroll slowly. On page 78, you're seeing the text that we saw yesterday that is untouched. This is existing, set out in Act 73. This is how the preliminary application works. And it sets out in subdivision 2 the considerations for approval. And then it sets out in subdivision B the actual eligibility conditions themselves, which we spoke about yesterday related to the needs piece. So these are eligibility conditions. You're only getting kicked in for eligibility for state aid if you're meeting these conditions. And we spoke about on page 79 that one of the additions Act 73 made compared to the old program was that it tried to encourage under subdivision 2 as an alternative eligibility condition to that needs piece, that the project results in consolidation of 2 or more school buildings and will serve the educational needs of students in a more cost-effective and educationally appropriate manner as compared to individual projects constructed separately. I will just note that I am likely to put asterisks where this text is in the next draft because this is exclusively provided for context. It is not something that is touched here. I didn't have to include it in the first place. I just did because I thought that people would likely ask the question what they are. So just know that that will happen. Oh. Okay. On page 80, you can see the language we spoke about yesterday. I was noting some of the complexities related to sequencing with the fact that you now need to know what your state aid is before you vote your bond. This to me is one of the more complicated pieces of this section. Under existing law, you don't receive preliminary approval, you don't receive prioritization or final approval until you've already voted funds or authorized the bond. But because now you can't really do that until you know what the size of the package will be, dependent on potential state aid you would receive in the form of general bonding support, that language has been struck. And I have some green highlighted language coming up that tries to keep reminding you of that concern. Okay. Subdivision 4, request for legislative appropriation. I do have a small tweak here, and this is where the first changes that may, I don't think this affects your pagination because this is such a small tweak, but this is something that came up this morning. You'll recall that the agency is required to submit its construction funding request, and identify those projects that should be supported by state bonding. And then there's going to be submission of the recommended budget, the capital budget. I heard some things related to this recommended capital budget piece, but for now it's remaining in there. But the thing that I heard this morning was that the bill does not need to travel to the institutions committees.
I talked to, I think I said this earlier, but I talked to Alice this morning. They're taking more testimony on the bonding capacity tomorrow. But they didn't think it made sense for it to come to us, for it to come to them, that it could come to us.
So the school construction projects, the committees you see this going to for a recommended total school construction appropriation would now be your House committees on education and on ways and means, and your the equivalent Senate committees, education and finance. And that's for your total school construction appropriation for the next fiscal year, page 81. This is not necessarily going to make sense right now, but we'll come to a section later that is tied to the treasurer's recommended updates to this draft. So that's the call out you see in highlight, page 81. Appropriation for the next fiscal year to the General Assembly for inclusion in the education payment. To forecast what that is, this is a kind of non-substantive tweak to the education payment section of Title 16, just to say that the state will appropriate kind of total funding for education, and it's going to include all sorts of things, your ed spending, your categorical grants, the things you already receive, plus anything that's required under this chapter. Like I said, I don't think it's intended to have a substantive effect, so we can talk about it when we get there. That's why that's included here. Okay, in subdivision 5, this is your final approval for construction aid. You have the same sequencing concern here. The language requiring voting of funds or bond authorization has been struck, as we discussed yesterday, so that you could get the state aid amount. But there are some pieces highlighted here that remain that may be complicated by the fact that you haven't voted funds. And that's that the district has made arrangements for project construction supervision by persons competent in the building trades. I don't know if they can do that in the absence of having voted funds or an authorized bond. And similarly, the district has provided for construction financing as a project during a period prescribed by the agency. I just genuinely don't know if you can do those things without having voted funds or authorized a bond. So just wanted to flag them. There may be good reasons to require them as a final check, but maybe there's another way to sequence this where you ensure that those things happen pre-release of funds, but you could be awarded your state aid amount before you've done those pieces. I'm not sure.
Like those charts should be part of the approval, the original preliminary approval.
If you think about the way the language works before any of these changes are made, it's kind of the preliminary and final are quite similar.
Yes.
And the final application, which could come immediately after the preliminary, is really like a check. Have you done the groundwork that you're really about to break ground, basically? Like that's the way that I read it. But I will wait to see. Yeah.
Thanks.
Stuff about playgrounds. Okay.
Interesting that playgrounds are mentioned, but.
It dates to the old state aid program and I think relates to federal law. So at the bottom of page, I think I'm on 82. Okay. 82, we have the award of construction aid. And I'm just going to read this again because this is core to what you guys are posting here. So base amount of award shall fund 50% of the total approved cost of a project. I did want to flag because I think there was a question yesterday about what is approved cost of a project. Is that a defined term? It is not a defined term, but this is a term that has been used in the school construction program for some time. It is employed in the guidebook that is provided by the Agency of Education. The old program awarded 30% of the total approved cost, and you can guess at the intuitive concept here, which is in rule, there's a determination of what are the approved costs that are coverable by a project, right? Maybe not the whole thing should receive aid, And so this is saying you get a percentage of aid that is in proportion to just the approved portion of the project. Things that are beyond the scope of what would be awarded aid under the program will not be covered. So I don't think you need to define the term. It is something that has existed for some time and is used in this space. But I did want to flag that.
In the interim moment, Representative Holcomb managed to write to Representative Conlin about the idea of including community schools. Representative Conlin said he felt that met his committee's direction, and so we will work after we've recessed to integrate that into those priorities. Representative Odie.
When we were just talking about total approved costs, and what if that is the way to have people have skin in the game? This is a terrible idea, but if I don't
say it.
But okay, so
What do you think?
I won't say.
Okay. If you come back to it and think it's a good idea, then do say it later. Okay.
I'm gonna start speaking. No, I'm not. Please no. Okay, I'm sorry. So, base amount to be 50% of the total approved costs. And I know that there's some continued discussion as to how to think about bonus incentives. So currently in this draft, projects are eligible for additional bonus incentives as specified in rule. That includes the rulemaking that we just spoke about, including those wealth measures, like to fund up to an additional 45% of the total approved cost. This means that you could get anywhere of a range of 50 to 95% of the total approved cost covered by state aid. If you were to explore a more flat concept, like was discussed earlier, maybe in tandem with the considerations about how there are already equalization measures for the supplemental spending, then you wouldn't need the bonus incentives piece, but you would still need to retain prioritization. So I would have to change some of the rulemaking language and probably clean up some of the chapter if that's the direction.
I think we're probably gonna fix it through a change in supplemental districts and.
Okay. Under subsection B, this is telling you the way that the aid package could, what it might be composed of. Got a lot of, yeah.
There's a lot of coughing going on there, folks. Do we need to like air out the room a little? Get some water.
Um,
Do you need anything, John?
I need session to adjourn.
So much more to know.
We're almost there.
Contingent. Also, yeah, 13.
Hey, John.
Construction aid shall be awarded as a debt service subsidy. I'm finding myself very funny right now for some reason. It's in my mind. Construction aid shall be awarded as a debt service subsidy as support through state bonding or as a combination of both. So you could receive both debt service subsidy, support through state bonding. You could also receive them exclusively in one or another. If it is exclusively as a debt service subsidy, you don't have the same sequencing concerns. You're going to have to solve that problem anyway. Amount shall be awarded annually or subject to an annual appropriation for the purposes of the program. Shall be released only once the applicant has voted funds or authorized a bond for the estimated cost of the project to be covered by the applicant. So this is where we moved the language related to authorization or bonding. It's for release of the funds. And I did want to note that it's authorized a bond for the total estimated cost of the project to be covered by the applicant, because in this case, there could be two bonding components, both state and local.
On line 21, you mean, do these words mean once the applicant has voted funds or authorized a bond the first time, not subsequently, to continue paying payments?
Yes, yes, it is triggered by having voted funds or authorized a bond, which is a one-time thing that triggers it. Yep. But I get where you're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah.
On page 83, we still have this subdivision C that calls out caps. So annual total debt service subsidies awarded under this chapter shall not exceed undefined dollar figure, and annual total state bonding support awarded under this chapter shall not exceed 50 million. So I don't have it highlighted, but just reiterating from yesterday that the cap on debt service subsidies is unsettled. And I would flag too that the cap on the state bonding piece is also something sort of in alignment with treasurer type recommendations for protecting the state's credit rating, much as the subject to annual appropriation is as well. Okay, we saw this wage, this is the real thing that's going to throw off the pagination. So I think the pages 84 through 89 may be off by basically 8 lines or something like that. This morning, the draft that I had provided just to explain, I had omitted this wage requirements language, but the draft was with editing when I first added this language. And now I have added back in. So this is not anything new. You saw this yesterday, but I had accidentally excluded it from this morning's draft. So just know that pages 83 onward for you guys will be off by maybe 8 lines. Section 73, this is the repeal of the prohibition on providing state aid to deferred maintenance. We talked about that yesterday. Then section 74, this is to Representative Flanagan's earlier question, legacy debt. We are finally here. We still have the same language that's been discussed for a few weeks now. School districts shall be eligible to receive aid equal to 100% of the debt service costs of the district's outstanding indebtedness, quite broad. And then you have the date by which that cutoff was set, December 31, 2025. Aid to be awarded annually for annual debt service costs up to a maximum total annual amount of fine, subject to an annual appropriation. I can pause here if helpful, or I can just finish up the draft, depending on.
Brian, you good?
No, that's
Okay.
Thank you.
I need that explained a little bit.
What would you like to explain?
A school district is eligible for sure to receive aid equal to 100% of the debt service cost of its outstanding indebtedness as of December 1, 2025. So
You need it.
only
Yep.
as of that day. and
Correct.
that's it.
So it would be the outstanding indebtedness that exists as of that date. You would receive aid for that into the future, but you would not be receiving 100% coverage of any debt incurred beyond that point. Is that
For that,
beyond that point? So afterward. So
So
you're
the
getting
debt-
legacy debt, which is debt up to December 31st, 2025. So if you incurred it in 1990, 2000, 2015, whenever, you have that indebtedness on the books that you're paying each year because you still have bond payments on those. That exists as of December 31, 2025. You're getting aid equal to 100% of that, those debt service costs into the future for those bonds. Any new debt that you've incurred in January 1, 2026 or thereafter is not covered by this aid section.
One thing I just want to flag is we have to put a number in the XX before the bill leaves the committee. Legislation that has placeholders for numbers. Representative
I also thought we had talked sort of offline about a distinction between like actual construction and like bonded debt, capital debt versus other types of debt, because there's this accounting weirdness that like all kinds of contracts now that districts take on are considered debt. So like your computers, for example, may be a long-term lease. That's considered debt by accounting standards, but we're not talking, I don't think, about covering everybody's, leases and all these things that are part of just general operations that have just been chosen to be funded in a certain way that might be considered debt for accounting purposes versus actual like capital debt that was taken out for construction projects. And then I think it's still kind of up in the air what we do with things like debt related to lawsuit settlements and things that might not be construction, but that are going to be, if we don't fund them outside of the foundation formula, then they're going to be into opportunities for kids underneath the foundation formula. So I just think we probably need more words here. I'm happy to draft some more words and send them to John, if that would be helpful.
I recall the same discussion, just to say the path that got us here.
Yeah.
This began as a legacy debt aid piece that spoke exclusively to capital indebtedness. The request was to then expand it to cover things like ongoing settlement costs and things along those lines. And so the broad concept of indebtedness was embraced, and then it led to exactly the points that you're making, Representative Burkhart, which is maybe it should be just a specific list of kinds of indebtedness that you would like to have covered. So it could be capital and then whatever named items you would like to have.
Okay,
And my guess is that if we make a fairly discrete named list and something comes up in a district in 2 years, they will fully let the legislature know that their specific category is not on this list and they would like it to be on this list.
yeah, I was pausing only to think through whether there's possibly an easy way to find a list from someone now.
I would call VASBO because they can tell you what kind of unexpected debt they get. And this is, I think you'd be in some big one. Can we just talk about the 100% forgiveness? Because anyone who approved a bond prior to 2025 never expected to have no liability for it.
Never expect to have what?
That's true.
I'm sorry,
Did
I just.
anyone who approved, well, maybe I'm wrong. Did people who approved a bond prior to December 31st, 2025, assume the state would pay the full cost of the debt on that project?
I mean, in my experience, some districts imagine that their debt is paid by their education payment and they think of that as a state cost. And some districts still think that all the money they spend is carried locally. So I'm not sure, but that all strikes me as like a district perceptual issue of how the education fund works. So but I don't know if I'm answering your question. I don't think I am.
I'm asking why 100% forgiveness of legacy debt. Why would they not be carrying some of that on the, I'm just,
How would they carry it?
the same way people who take new projects out on supplemental capital.
So I think part of the thinking when we were working through this last month was that district debt being carried would be a disincentive for mergers, and we wanted to remove as many disincentives for mergers as possible. And so this is one way to remove a disincentive. The other is that those districts made those decisions under a very different financing system. And it wasn't fair to sort of ask them to carry it into a future financing system in that way.
I think there's no
Those
such,
two thoughts.
there's no such thing as fairness. I think often people got hit by PCB at a different time. People also have different capacity. Some people have been unable to raise.
So would you like to change this number?
I know, just
Other number?
asking what the rationale is for that. You know,
I think that was the rationale that I remember being discussed in committee. Does anyone else have any other rationale that they heard at the time?
In addition, I'd like to say, when a school gets kicked out of its school and then has to build a new school. And right from the start, the people who are representing that school say, in any future financing system, we will have to get help forward. Yes.
but help is different than 100%.
Oh, yeah, I was.
Okay, Representative Higley had his hand up a while ago. I don't know if it's still
I
relevant.
asked this question a while
Everybody else
ago.
can.
Do we know how much legacy debt is out there?
We do.
Yeah, I'm getting to it, sorry.
Charlie's gonna forward you a spreadsheet that he has been looking for inside his
That
email.
came out of the school, school construction advisory board, state aid for school construction advisory board.
And we reviewed that spreadsheet 2 different times when Michael Gahn was in for testimony.
So that's the
on the committee page
legacy
too.
construction debt. It doesn't include
That's true.
legacy settlement debt or
Yes.
other
Yeah, right.
weird debt that might need to be included. But that would obviously be the biggest part of legacy debt.
So Representative Kimball is gonna find the spreadsheet again, so we can actually put a number in there. Representative Burkhart is gonna tailor that language a little more explicitly. And we're gonna keep on going. Okay,
How does that spreadsheet, that's got legacy construction debt in it? And we may need to round that up for something to make sure that we're encompassing
Yeah.
settlement debt. So
John, let's go to section 75.
Go. Okay. We're still on page 84, or at least for me, it's 84. I think it's also 84 for you guys. Section 75 and 76. This is the language that I forecasted earlier. This is sort of a response to suggestions from the treasurer's office. And it is tied to the language, the clause that I highlighted earlier related to the legislative appropriation section in the application process where I said, you know, there's going to be this governor recommended budget, going to go to the committees of jurisdiction, and they're going to recommend a total school construction appropriation that would then be paid through the education payment under section 4011A. So that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing it twice because I have to amend it now and in the future post foundation formula rollout. This is not really intended to be a substantive change, but I will read it. So annually, the General Assembly shall appropriate funds for an education payment to pay for statewide education spending, portion of its education amount for each adult education and secondary credentials program student, and any other amounts.
Why don't we read it silently to ourselves and you can have whatever experience you need.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So the thinking here, is partly a request from the treasurer's office, but it's partly to sort of, acknowledge the apples to apples, apples to pomegranates, sort of like what's the difference between education spending and EOP and all the other things to say, am I explaining myself? Well, okay, this is how I explain it to you. That there's the education opportunity payment, which is calculated a certain way, and then we're going to have grants that wrap around that we've discussed, and a lot of them we're going to figure out next year. And altogether, that funding that goes to a district is the education payment to that district.
Yeah, the other way to say this is the General Assembly always has to appropriate funds for payments. And this is just saying, yes, do that. And it will include the host of things related to education, including school construction aid. So it's not meant to be a substantive change. Yep. And like I said, I'm just hitting it in two instances because I need to amend current funding system and future funding system.
Yeah, I know there's some existing language, but when we talk about a portion of the base education amount for each adult education secondary credential program, I know this has been negotiated in the budget. What happens in the budget is dependent on what happens here. I don't even know how to get feedback on some stuff because we have so many language moving in so many places. And I just wondered if anyone is tracking that.
I certainly have not been in a position yet to track it, meaning that all of this stuff is kind of happening live. But there is a reconciliation that happens in our office with competing sections, right? We have to resolve any conflicting sections. I know this bill has a ways to go, so I'm hoping at some point we'll have a clearer picture of what needs to travel where. And again, this is something that I may talk to folks offline about this specific section, because again, I don't know that it has a substantive effect. But yeah, I agree with your concern that there's duplicate sections traveling in a lot of bills.
And in that vein, there's a door that's been opened. I know that some districts are sending students to sort of work, serve, learn type things that have different costs. So they're basically subcontractors now for education that's tied into some of these credentials. Is anyone tracking that overall universe?
What do you think would check that reason?
I would assume House Ed, but I just think we're opening, as we create pressure on the base, if people can send some students off and pay 12,000 and hold the balance, the base, I think, you know, we're just creating some unusual incentives here, and I wonder if anyone's paying attention.
Thank you. Can you say more about subcontractors?
I don't really want to get onto it here.
Okay, well,
Maybe I'll follow up.
all, I'm just.
Yeah, maybe I'll follow up with,
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk to,
Okay.
I just think we've created some very unusual incentives here.
We're almost there. Page 85. Same supplemental district spending language that we discussed yesterday. Really, you need to look on the final underlined sentence in this subdivision. The cap on supplemental district spending does not apply to school construction expenditures. This is trying to address some of the earlier concerns about capped spending, right? Once you move to the foundation formula and how you would cover those ongoing bond costs. Effective dates. Kirby's already taken you through, I think the main of this. The sections that I have are really not, mine are like most of the Act July 1, 2026. The one piece I would note here is, well, there's two things I should note. These sections 76 and 77, I'm going to need to pull them from this section, which is taking effect July 1, 2029. But they are supposed to be tied to the foundation formula contingencies, which is why they're currently here, but they should be July 1, 2031. And the piece I would note for all of these sections is we've looked at with Kirby this set of effective dates, but you also look at effective dates with Beth to an extent, because there's two places in this bill where you need to look to actually identify the relevant effective dates. The first is the amendments to the underlying effective dates in Act 73. And I can try to find that. Yes. If you're looking at paper, that's at the very beginning, starting on the bottom of page 3. So I just wanted to note that this is where the effective dates from what I call my sections, but they're the foundation formula and statewide education tax and all those things. This is where those are set out. You see the December 1 letter call out here, July 1, 2029, and you see the main contingency language here, right? Take effect on July 1, 2030, provided that, and you have all the language that you discussed before with. I'm going to pause that, but I just wanted to remind you to look in both places to find all of the effective dates. And if you're trying to look at the timeline to make sense of it, you do have to check both sets of effective dates to make sense of it. And as I understand it, there's going to be some updates to the effective dates based on the discussions with Kirby. That's it.
Well, I really didn't think we were gonna get through this bill today, and we did, and it's not even 4 o'clock. So congratulations and thank you. Should have had faith in the magic of the schedule. Thank you, John.
Sure.
So we have outstanding pre-K language that we are working on. Representative Burkhart, you were doing a few definitional applications, expansions. Representative Wozniak, you're defining a term. Representative Holcomb, you are sharing that language from Peter with John. And something else that I don't remember. Remember?
I'm sure someone will go back and read it.
Okay. Anyone else have a homework assignment? Or are there things? Oh, Charlie, you're getting a number to put into the XX.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm supposed to check with, the GovOps.
Yes. Thank you. You're checking with GovOps. Beth is finishing some definitions. And I think we'll have another go round on this all tomorrow with all that new language. Representative Wozniak.
I'm just naming mostly for Beth that I have to work tonight. Yes. Immediately after here, so that might have to wait until Thursday. Frustrating. Wait, tomorrow is Thursday.
Indeed it is. So maybe it can something else.
I'll get it to you at some point tomorrow.
I think it needs to happen today.
Do my best.
Okay, maybe you two could just go right now. Okay. Like really, just go and we'll finish up without you. Okay. Yes.
The other thing that Carol and I were supposed to look at was that amount of $500,000.
Oh, you were at a press conference. She said that you wanted to increase it to 50 million. So we all- No, she said that you guys were okay with what was there and we all said he's not here. Is that okay with him? Said yes.
One person.
Yes, I said that. I said that. I was.
Outrageous.
Yes. Thank you for reminding that. Is there anything else anyone wants to cover before we? Lots of homework assignments. Also really encourage people to read the bill 955, the part that's from health education, so that we have that background inside our brains. Thank you and see you tomorrow morning.